Okay, everyone, good morning and welcome back. We are in the course on bioethics, looking at bioethics at the beginning of human life, St. Thomas University. And all right, first of all, I'll begin with a little prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in us the fire of your divine love. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. All right, before I get started, any questions or comments from anything previous or going forward? Hearing none, then we go forward. So you've noticed that we jumped in right away into the bioethical issues at the beginning of human life, which are pretty intense, right? These are the contemporary issues of abortion, in vitro fertilization, and contraception, three big hot topics. And the bottom line from a principle of bioethics is no, because each one of these is a grave offense to the dignity of the human person, whether born or unborn. And so now we're going to move into two more topics, this and next lecture, and hopefully they will be on the positive side. So alternatives, right? I say that if there was, how can I frame it? Let me frame it this way. If there was no alternative to human procreation, so that every act of sexual intercourse resulted in pregnancy, right? Perhaps the church would have to reevaluate its position with regards to contraception. But the fact is that most women are infertile most of the time during most of their lives, if you think about that. So on average, there is more time of infertility on a monthly basis than there is of fertility. And therefore, there is an alternative, and it happens to be a natural, healthy alternative to the artificial manipulation or intervention on human procreation. Okay, and of course, that is known by natural family planning. And the first thing I want to say about natural family planning, that it is not the rhythm method. And because the rhythm method is based on a post-ovulatory event, which is basically menstruation, whereas natural family planning is based on pre-ovulatory events. In other words, events in the body of the woman that are leading toward ovulation. Okay, I'll talk a little bit more about that, but still to stay with the big picture, the human egg is fertile, mature, on average, for about a day, 24 hours, every month, right? So let's assume, I always try to speak to the norm, right? To what is normal. And what is normal is one ovulation per month during the fertile time of the woman's life, which begins, we know, with what is known as menarche, her first period, and ends with menopause. And for keeping the numbers simple, the math simple, let's say that the woman has her menarche at 10 years of age and her menopause at 50 years of age. We have 40 years of fertility there, all right? When you think about it, it's one egg a month. And we did the math, I think, last time. One egg a month times 12 months, that's 12 eggs a year. So 12 times 40 right, is 480. So with less than 500 eggs, a woman is fertile all her 40 years of reproductive age, okay, which is amazing because actually baby girls are born with millions of eggs. They are arrested after meiosis 1. Meiosis 2 needs to occur, beginning 10 years later, and so on, right? One egg at a time. And so really what happens is that chronologically, the eggs get old literally within the body of the woman. And most of those eggs, as they get old, do not survive. They die, right? And what happens to them is that they're basically reabsorbed by the ovaries themselves. So the follicles that don't mature have become old. The body has a very sophisticated biochemical way of detecting the follicles that are still good and the ones that are no longer good. And they are reabsorbed by the body, by the tissue. So that's why nature is economic in many ways, all right? Everything is recycled in nature, especially when they are organic compounds. All right, so we have this 1 egg a month on average, and that egg is fertile, is mature for about a day, for about 24 hours, there in the ampulla of the fallopian tube. And there it just waits to see if it's going to be fertilized or not. And so if the egg is not fertilized, it is discarded. Little by little, it will move down the fallopian tube through the uterus. And remember, in the meantime, the lining of the uterus has also become thickened, the endometrium, for possible implantation, right? And so when there's no fertilization, obviously there will be no implantation, and then all that tissue is also discarded. It's known as sloughing off. And that is what causes the menstruation itself. So amid that blood, there will be a little bit of tissue and one tiny little egg, which is about 10 microns in diameter, so it cannot really be seen by the human eye. But that's what happens there. Now, when that egg is discarded, it's not very regular necessarily. Some women are very regular, some are very irregular, and most are somewhere in between, more or less, varying 1 or 2 or 3 days from period to period. But it's not a very accurate measurement, because when the body discards that egg, it's not a big deal. The big deal is when the ovary is ovulating. That's the big deal, because that's precisely the function of the whole reproductive tract, right? Is to produce a mature egg, a follicle that will produce a mature egg for the possibility of fertilization. What I'm trying to say by all this is that biologically, physiologically, the whole emphasis on the female reproductive tract is to produce a mature egg. And there are typically several hormones that are associated with that. I'm not going to go into details of that because it's not necessary for the bioethical analysis as such. But just to know that the whole emphasis of the physiology of the female reproductive tract is to produce that mature egg for the possibility of fertilization, and then 5 to 7 days later, implantation itself. Okay. So the egg is mature for about 1 day, which means that, say on an average of 28 days, a cycle of 28 days for a woman, the other 27 days, she's not fertile. She cannot get pregnant, right? Only when there's a mature egg will she get pregnant. So you can see that on average, every month, a woman is mostly infertile. When you add that up year per year, then a woman on average is mostly infertile during her fertile years, during the 40 years of fertility, what we call reproductive age. All right, now on the other hand, on the sperm side, it is also known that the sperm may live up to about 5 or 6 days inside the female reproductive tract. By itself, sperm is can only live also for about 24 hours within its natural environment, which is the semen, because semen provides, it's a fluid, it's mostly water, but it also provides lubrication, it provides nutrition, it's also antibacterial, very similar to the properties of the cervical mucus for the woman, okay? But the sperm in its natural environment will only live for about 24 hours also. However, inside the female reproductive tract, it gets like a booster, and it can live up to about 5 days, more or less, all right? On average, about 5 days. That means that it receives extra nutrition, and in fact, it even finishes what is known as capacitation, the capacity for fertilizing itself within the female reproductive tract. So we have to add those 5 days to the 1 day of fertility. In other words, if a woman is ovulating on day 1, let's say, she can get pregnant up to 5 days before day 1, right? So we have to add that up to the count if we're going to use natural family planning as a means of avoiding pregnancy or trying to achieve pregnancy. So now we're talking about 5 days. And then just for convenience, because it happens that a week has 7 days, we can add 1 more day, let's say as safety, at the beginning and at the end of the 5 days. Now we have 7 days. So just out of convenience, we're looking at a week, right? So we can say functionally that on average, a couple who is having their intimacy, their marital intimacy on a regular basis, right? She will be fertile 1 week out of every month. And the other 3 weeks, she's infertile because the sperm will not last that long within her reproductive tract. Plus, she is only producing 1 egg a month on average for what's normal, what's the norm. So we're looking at 1 week of fertility out of every month, which means that the other 3 weeks, she's infertile. And no matter how much intercourse they have during those 3 weeks, she will not get pregnant. And that's all natural. That's without any kind of artificial interference, whether it's chemical, mechanical, or surgical, like we covered last week. Now, so natural family planning, as I'm saying, is based on determining ovulation. And that is the crux of NFP, is for the woman to determine her time of ovulation with a high degree of assurance, okay? With a high degree of assurance when she is ovulating. That's the very crux of NFP. Like I say, she will focus on symptoms that lead toward that ovulation. So now we get into symptoms.
You said that the NFP is for the women to determine her ovulation.
Yes, her time of ovulation, when she's ovulating, with certainty, with as much certainty as possible. Of course, it's never going to be 100% because in nature there's never 100%. All right, but with a high degree of assurance. In fact, when we look at the stats, what did we say for contraception? So we're trying to present NFP as an alternative, as a healthy alternative to contraception, right? Contraception is anywhere between 97 to 99%, depending on what method is used or a combination of methods. You know, you can stack it up as high as you want. For example, for a married couple, she's on the pill and he's using condoms. What more can you do beyond that? Or maybe hysterectomy or I'm sorry, tubal ligation and vasectomy. That's still only going to be 97 to 99% with perfect use, which is, again, difficult for humans to do, right? So if we can reach that kind of assurance with NFP, then pretty much we have an equivalency that is healthy, it's natural, doesn't cost anything, but it does require discipline. It does require discipline, all right? Because it requires a lot of dialogue between the couple and so forth, and really to be together, to be coordinated and on sync with regards to their sexual intimacy. All right, so as always in the bioethical analysis, first we look at the biology of it, the physiology, and then we look at the bioethical evaluation or analysis based on the biology, right? Based on what nature tells us. So we're going to look at the symptoms for ovulation, and then we'll do the bioethical analysis based on that. Again, if you have any questions or comments at any point, just chime in. So symptoms. Symptoms for ovulation, and obviously we're going to be concentrating mostly on the woman at this point. Then later we'll talk about the husband, his role in all this, right? Because with regards to ovulation for the husband, this is all theory, obviously. So with regards to symptoms, there are 10 ovulation symptoms, at least 10 ovulation symptoms of the woman's body that are pointing toward ovulation, all right? And 3 are considered primary and 7 of them are secondary, meaning that the first 3 are the most important and the most reliable. And of those 3, 1 is the most reliable of all. The other 7 typically are used to confirm or to verify, but when there's a mixed signal, let's say, between the primary and the secondary symptoms, obviously we're going to go with the primary symptoms. So the primary symptoms of ovulation are the basal body temperature, the activity of the cervix, and the cervical mucus. Let's look at them in some detail. First, the basal body temperature, which is also known as BBT. We have all these acronyms, right? Then the cervix activity and the mucus. So the BBT, we all have a body temperature as mammals, right? Warm-blooded, which is what? Fahrenheit 97.8, 97.5, whatever, around there, 97. Fahrenheit, centigrade, 37, right? Remember the incubator of IVF. Okay, so that's our body temperature. It happens that when ovulation occurs, that body temperature rises slightly, right? There's a little spike, which can be anywhere from ½ degree to 1 degree Fahrenheit. So it's very slight, but it is a spike. It's very clear, typically the day before ovulation, her body temperature will spike ½ to 1 degree, all right? Now, there are thermometers today that measure decimals and even centesimals. So it can be measured, there's a technology available, and they're even digital and they have a memory. I say this because our basic body temperature, our basal body temperature is at rest when we wake up in the morning, for example. Then when we start moving through the day, that body temperature is going to fluctuate up and down. For example, if we're moving fast, right, it's going to rise. And if we are in the air conditioning, it's going to lower a little bit, typically about 1 degree more or less back and forth fluctuation. But that's precisely the size of the spike. So that's why when a woman is using basal body temperature for determining her ovulation, she has to take that temperature early in the morning when the body is still at rest. Because once we get up in the morning, we start walking around, we drink hot coffee, etc., that's going to alter our body temperature somewhat, all right? And it's not going to be as accurate. So for the BBT, it would be something like this. She sets up the alarm, let's say for 5 a.m. And she has a thermometer next to, what is that called? The night table, right? Next to the bed. The thermometer is there, alarm rings, take her temperature, typically the mouth, right? Under the tongue. And then once the temperature is recorded, she sets the thermometer down and keeps on sleeping until she has her regular waking hour, 7, 8, whatever time afterwards, right? Then sometime during the day, she'll go back to the thermometer, and because it's digital and has a memory, that temperature is recorded. So she doesn't have to record it, right? She doesn't have to plot it when she takes the temperature. It's recorded there, and then once she opens her computer, opens the program, a spreadsheet, she will record the temperature. But what she's doing basically is charting. She's generating a chart of her temperature on a daily basis. And when she does that month after month, there's going to be a pattern. I should have some kind of let me see. Charting. Now, there are all kinds of aids in online about this. You can just study them. There's one that addresses what we're talking about. There's the peak. And here is the body temperature is caused by the luteinizing hormone. Right? So that's the ovulation day. See it? It's coming out on day 26 on this chart. Anyway, you can go online and you can see many, many of these. Here's another example. As the woman plots her body temperature. It's a little cumbersome in taking the temperature itself and then registering it on the chart. But when a woman does this month after month after month, then she will get a mean, an average day when she's ovulating, and it can be used for predicting. It's a primary symptom because it's based precisely on the release of the luteinizing hormone, which causes that spike. However, of the 3 primary symptoms, it's not as accurate as the other 2, because let's say that the woman may have a slight temperature, right? Have a slight fever, low-grade fever, as they call it. It may mask or it may compete with a spike. Let's say perhaps, unfortunately, she got a UTI, which is not uncommon in women, a urinary tract infection. Well, that's going to produce perhaps a low-grade fever. And so it will mask and it will compete with the spike, the LH spike, all right? So of the 3 primary symptoms, it is the least accurate. Let's move to the activity of the cervix. All right, it happens that, so the cervix is a circular muscle, it's a sphincter, all right? And it's a smooth muscle, meaning that it is involuntary. It is not skeletal muscle, it's not attached to any bone, and we don't have direct control over it, unlike skeletal muscle that is typically attached to bone and is part of, it's unnerved by the central nervous system, and we have voluntary control, right? Like moving our arms, etc. So typical smooth muscles, these sphincters, are circular muscles like the mouth, for example. It's a combination of smooth and skeletal muscle also because we do have control over the mouth sometimes. The anus is a sphincter. In the gastric system, in the GI tract, right? The muscles at the entrance and the exit of the stomach, for example, are smooth muscles along the intestines, etc. Anyway, so the cervix is a circular muscle, and it is truly the opening, the real opening to the internal organs of the female, all right? The vagina basically is a tube. It's also a circular muscle. It's a tube, but the vagina is open to the exterior. What really opens and closes the gate, if you will, to the internal organs of the woman is the cervix, because it's between the vagina and the uterus itself. Now, that cervix has what we call an activity during the reproductive cycle, all right? And that activity is involuntary. It responds to hormones, to the various hormones that are released during the different types of the cycle. So if we set a baseline here, this red line, right, which is on the high side, when the woman is fertile, that cervix is up high, is high, comparing high with regards to the vaginal tract, right? And it's also open and is soft, and the mucus is flowing through it. All of this, if you think about it functionally, is preparing for intercourse and possible fertilization. The mucus is flowing, flowing. I'm not looking at the quality of the mucus yet. I'm just saying that the mucus is flowing through the os. Os is the opening. Os is like the mouth. It's called an os. That's a little Latin in there. So the mucus is flowing. The cervical mucus is flowing through into the vagina. So it's high, soft, open, and centered, pretty centered. These are actual photographs. And these would be the walls of the vagina on the side here. Whereas when she's infertile, right, when ovulation is not occurring, the cervix closes tightly, as you can see, compare the os, this os to this os. Closes, becomes tight, it's known as firm, right, not soft. It drops down, and it even becomes off-center to boot. It's amazing, it even gets off-center. So again, functionally, we're all adults in this class, and we're talking about this physiologically with regards to the anatomy and the physiology of the human sexual intercourse. It's even off-center, right? Because on average, the head of the penis would be central. So it's even trying to miss, to stay off from where the ejaculate would be. So you notice everything that goes on functionally when she's infertile to impede the passage of sperm to begin with into the tract. Not only that, the mucus itself is not flowing. Actually, it forms a plug on the inside of the uterus. So that's the infertile. A woman can detect this digitally, typically with the middle finger, all right, through the vagina, and she can detect what is the activity of her cervix. She can detect whether the cervix is low and firm and tight, right? And kind of on the dry side, or if the cervix is high and soft and moist. So this is a digital exam that she does herself. Of course, hygiene is primordial here. So obviously it's essential for her to wash her hands before doing this digital exam. But then don't wash your hands immediately afterwards because as she does the exam, she's also going to pick up some of the mucus on her finger, typically the middle finger, which is on average the longest finger on our hand, all right? Pick up some of that mucus and then do the next symptom, which is the most accurate by far, which is the mucus, the quality of the mucus, all right? The quality of the mucus. Because here we're down to the biochemical level. So you notice that with regards to the BBT, it's a physiological thing. but it's being measured by a thermometer. So already there's a filter. The activity of the cervix is an anatomical thing, but it's also what we know as the gross anatomy, right? GROSS has been detected by the finger and so forth. But here with the mucus, we're down to the biochemical level. So it's by far the most accurate of the three primary symptoms. It turns out that the mucus changes quality whether the woman is ovulating or not ovulating, all right? So when she's not ovulating, that mucus is what we call tacky. It is opaque. It is not elastic. It is tacky, all right, sticky. And it doesn't, when it's put between the middle finger and the thumb, it breaks up. If the woman pulls on it, it will break off, okay, like that. So the top and the bottom are infertile times. So the mucus is opaque, tacky, and not very elastic. What happens then is when she's ovulating, or when she's getting ready to ovulate within 1 or 2 days before ovulation, the quality of the mucus actually changes. It's a combination of factors. Part of it is pH, another is the other hormones that are within her system, all right? But that mucus changes quality biochemically. And typically these are polymers, they're proteins and carbohydrates and polymucocarbohydrates. They're long fibers. They're long fibers. So during the fertile time, these fibers are elongated precisely. They're elongated, and so the mucus becomes transparent like an egg white before cooking the egg, right? The egg white before cooking it. It's transparent, it's stringy, it's elastic, up to 1 inch or more of elasticity, all right? And it's very wet, moist, hydrated. And so what happens is that those fibers actually at the biochemical level are long and elongated, and they actually form a highway for the sperm through which to travel. So they become like channels for the sperm to travel through there, because the sperm has to make their way all the way from the cervix through the uterus up the fallopian tube to the ampulla, as we saw in those videos, right? So it's when you think of the sperm as 5 microns or maybe less, that whole distance proportionally is a huge distance to travel. So the mucus during ovulation is long and stringy and watery. So it's a highway, it's a watery highway for the sperm. Whereas when she's not ovulating, that same mucus, in part because of a change in pH and in part because of the biochemical consistency of it, those fibers start intertwining with each other, and they make a mesh or a wad, like for example, fishing line when it gets tangled up, all right? And now what used to be highways for the sperm now actually becomes a roadblock and a plug. And that mucus actually concentrates at the base of the uterus here, as you can see, the fundus, I think it's called, this region, right? And it forms a plug there. So that now the sperm, on top of the fact that there's no egg to fertilize, the sperm has a hard time actually entering the reproductive tract. And not only sperm, but everything else, bacteria and so on and so forth, because this is literally the opening to the internal organs, right? So that acts as a plug or as a barrier to anything, any foreign object getting into the reproductive tract, all right? So you see, it's the same mucus, but it changes quality like that. And that is by far the most accurate of the 3 symptoms. And it's all controlled, if you will, monitored by the hormonal changes that occur in the cycle. And there's a big difference when she's actually ovulating, the day of ovulation, it is like rainfall in there. All right, it's very watery, very stringy. It also acts as a lubricant, etc. So you can see of the three primary symptoms, the cervical mucus is by far the most accurate of the three. Okay. Now, let's look at the, let me stop there for a moment. If anyone has any questions. Of course, it does take a daily exam, right? It's a daily exam that she does in the privacy of her bathroom, and she charts this on these charts. They're available. We can look at cervical mucus chart. All this available online for free with plenty of instruction on how to do it. Let's see. So here's one that is very simple. Oh, let's make this mistake of clicking into it. But it gives you some word options, a single word to describe that quality. Let me see where it went. Where did it go? Looking for the chart.
Father Trophy,
Yep.
I have a question. Do you need, in order for this to work the most accurate possible, do you need to have the three things done, or just by checking your mucus will be enough?
No, you can just go to the mucus directly and forget about the other two. I'm doing excess, if you will. I'm trying to be thorough here and give all the possibilities, all right? But really, especially if hygiene is available, then the mucus is definitely the most accurate. I'm trying to look at, I don't know if you can see it because it's kind of small, but it has words, just one word to describe the quality, right? To crunch it down to a single word. So let's try, here's a 28-day cycle. I hope you can see at least a little hand that I'm pointing on the upper right-hand side of the screen. Let's start with the, when she finished her period. So it says dry, 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 then sticky, 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 cloudy, cloudy, wet, slippery, cloudy, wet, slippery, sticky. So they have it down to about 4 words. All right, and then dry, 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 sticky, period. 4 days of period. And so obviously this area where it says wet and wet again, that's the time of ovulation there. All right.
So I have another question.
Yeah.
So if a woman is in IUD, because this is a decision that they had made,
Right.
and let's say they have already a couple of children, and they really don't want to have another child for a while, or they don't want to have another child. How long does it take from leaving the IUD and beginning to understand this kind of process?
Right.
Because I'm thinking in terms of maybe, you know, I know that there's natural family planning
Right.
classes, but what I'm thinking about is, and I'm thinking about my daughters, because I already, you know, it's not for
Don't
me.
get too specific, okay?
No, but I'm saying, girls that are younger, that are in that age,
Right.
that already have children or whatever. But what I had found difficult, number one, is that there's not a lot of classes going on. Number one. Number two, how can you help? Because I'm thinking in the long run range, what can be something that we can do with all this information. But a lot, the reality is that a lot of the girls that I know, young parents at the school, they already are in some kind of contraception
Right.
method. And if you really want to encourage this to take place, because it would be great if they're just getting married and do it. But I'm thinking also in those couples that already have families, but they're young and they don't want to have another child. How long does it take to be
Right.
able to say this is going to work?
Yes. So basically, you're asking about how to do the transition from contraception to NFP, all right? And various different scenarios that we can place there. So we'll get to that in the second part, actually, all right? So now I just want to cover the biology of it first so that we're all on the same page, being that the class is very heterogeneous with regards to backgrounds. Some have more scientific background than others. So I just want to cover the basis, the biological, physiological basis first. And then in the second part of today's lecture, we'll look at how to make the transition and so forth, and also what's in store for the husband in all this, all right? Because it's a crucial, she cannot get pregnant on her own. In other words, this takes definitely the collaboration of the husband, that communication that needs to occur between the two of them. So just hold on to the question for a while until we finish covering all the symptoms, and then we'll jump right into it, okay? Including some resources that I have posted here. We'll go into them in some more detail.
Father Shofi,
Yeah.
this is Jose. Good morning. A
Say
real
good
quick
morning.
question. What is the dominant hormone during the fertile mucus changes, or the fertile mucus, I would say, polysaccharide changes,
Yeah, it's
or polymer changes?
my understanding is the LH, no, the luteinizing hormone.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, LH, see it here, LH peak. I've always seen that referred to, the LH peak is just before the actual ovulation. You can see it's quite high, right? And so you notice here, you have the BBT going on, and the BBT is beginning to rise. It's on the log phase. If you were to, I don't know if you can see, can you people see this graph on the right hand of the screen? Anyone? Can you see it? Because
Yes, I can see it.
Screen share. Okay. So for example, if we were to put a slope on this BBT, we would see that it describing pretty much a sigmoid curve, right? Sigmoid S shape. So it's on the log phase of the curve, the log phase before it flattens. Whereas the LH peak is just before so when it's in the log phase, that's the LH peak. And then right after that is the actual ovulation day. So this kind of coincides with the rupturing of the follicle, if you will, as the egg is transitioning from the ovary into the ampulla through the infundibulum. All right.
Got it. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so these are the three primary symptoms. Now let's look at the 7 secondary symptoms just for the sake of completion. And interestingly, let's say what I need here is actually just a diagram of the female reproductive tract for illustration. So let me do this for a moment. There, doesn't magnify with the plus. Excuse me for a moment while I fool around there. It's actually interesting, counterintuitive. All right, so we're going to look at, let me see if I can minimize this, put it on the side. maybe too small. Say, excuse me for a moment while I rearrange my screen here. Okay, there. Right, we're gonna look at the 7 symptoms. And just to have a diagram helps. So Mittelschmerz comes from the German, which is middle pain, all right? Schmerz in German is pain, and Mittel is middle, middle pain. Now, this is not the menstruation pain, all right? This is not the pain of menstruation that happens, the cramps and so forth. Again, keep in mind that different women will experience different symptoms even during their lifetime. The same woman will experience different intensity of symptoms through the cycle, right? So there's a wide range here of symptoms and so forth, and how they are detected, intensity. The middle Schmerz is actually the movement of the infundibulum. So this part of the fallopian tube is like a little glove, and it's not actually attached to the ovary. There's a gap there, right? There's a gap. And so when the woman is ovulating, that little hand, that little glove, which is known as the infundibulum, will move in closer, in close contact with the ovary. And that slight movement, which is only a few millimeters, can cause some kind of pain or discomfort or feeling in that she detects this. Again, there's a wide range of intensity, if you will, from woman to woman. But that pain, which is not the menstruation cramps, is known as Mittelschmerz, and it's associated with ovulation. And it's just the movement of the fallopian tubes getting close, in close contact with the ovary itself, all right? Again, different intensities for different women and different intensities for the same woman throughout her reproductive years. But that's another symptom there. Spotting, which the spotting is not, again, it's not menstruation. I'm not talking about menstruation at all. I'm on the other end of the cycle, right? So menstruation is the infertile time. These are symptoms associated with ovulation, which, let's say on a 28 day, if menstruation is happening on day 1, this is day 14 at the opposite end, all right? Spotting can be associated as a small amount. It's not a flow like the menstrual flow, all right? It's a small amount. It could be associated with the actual rupture of the follicle, and some blood will seep through all the way down through the tract, and she may detect a little bit of spotting of blood right at the time of ovulation, which again is a very different scenario than the actual menstruation. Also, so the female reproductive tract anatomically and physiologically is gearing itself, let's say, toward the possibility of fertilization, right? And that fertilization naturally occurs through the act of intercourse, the marital act. So there will be some accumulation of water and fluids in the tract, especially the vagina will swell somewhat, and the ova, which is the opening of the tract, there will be some swelling there. Also mentally, right, at the psychological level, there's an increase of estrogen, so there's an increase of libido, of sexual desire during that time. The breasts also become tender sometimes, especially the nipple, again, because of the flow of hormones that's going through her body. There's a general sensation of bloating, of feeling somewhat heavy or retaining water, the body, right? And then finally, ferning. Ferning. How many of you have heard of ferning before? Ferning is kind of interesting. I just find it interesting from the scientific perspective, because the estrogen in her body is actually going through her whole body, all right? including up to the saliva. So there's so much estrogen that is being released during ovulation that it can even be detected in the saliva very slightly, very slightly. So let's look at saliva ferning. And there are kits that are used for detecting this. For example, there's a little kit. Let me show the kit first. It's like a little miniature telescope or a microscope that is just a single tube. Ferning lens. See, we have the little kit here. So it's a little tube like that, all right? And it has two lenses, so it's like a handheld microscope, just a single tube. And what it does is it detects this kind of pattern. Now, here's one that is estrogen is a hormone, and the woman will take some sample of saliva and put it on a slide, on a microscope slide, without a cover slip, and just let it dry by room temperature. Letting it dry by room temperature, the estrogen will crystallize and will form this pattern of crystallization. It's kind of on the growth side, you know, we're not looking at it in a fine magnification, but just with this little lens, it will form a crystallization pattern like that. Whereas when there is little or no estrogen in the saliva, then there's no ferning pattern, there's no crystallization. So this is called ferning because it looks a little bit like a fern, like an actual plant fern, right? Like the frond of a fern, like that. Looks a little bit like that pattern. You need to use some imagination. But basically, it's called a ferning pattern, right? Where you have a main stalk and then the side crystals sticking out laterally. So that's another one that can be used. And these little kits, like I say, they can be bought. There she's taking her sample of saliva. Here's one that is more extensive, just from the eye, which day looks to have most ferning in this pattern here, from day 1 to day 28. To my eye, just looking at it like that, this one seems to be having most ferning, no? Day 15, as you can see. Here, the ferning is beginning in the center, right? But 15 has much more, and then it goes away. So that's another one that is there, kind of interesting. So there are these 7 symptoms. The problem that I find, in a sense, is that there are too many symptoms because sometimes they can be in contradiction with each other. For example, what if you get ferning, but tacky mucus? You know, what to do? I'm giving 2 extreme examples, right? I'm using the most accurate with one of the least accurate of the symptoms. Let's say that she gets a ferning pattern, but a tacky mucus. Well, which one of the 2 are you gonna trust more? Remember, primary or secondary, right? That already is a giveaway. You're gonna go to the primary symptom for sure. Even though that ferning pattern looks very excellent, it could be something else that's going on with the hormones, but it's not ovulating necessarily, all right? So definitely go with the primary symptom. And then of the 3 primary symptoms, then we're back to, you can actually rank them. I have ranked them reversely here so that the mucus is the most accurate. Activity of the cervix, they should match up, these 2. And then whether there's a spike or not of the BBT, well, then that's secondary, really. But definitely these 2 are the most accurate. The other are there kind of a confirmation. Also, if the woman tends to be irregular, then these other secondary symptoms may help. But you notice what happens, because this is an average, this is a statistical average, right? What is the most robust? How do we get a robust average in statistics? The larger sample number, right? So keep in mind the population and the sample. We're not sampling the whole population here, because the whole population would mean to chart her 40 years of reproductive age, which is not the case, because we're just starting. Let's say she's in her teens, or she's in her 20s, or even 30s, right? But so we're taking a sample of the whole population. The whole population will be all 40 reproductive years. And the more robust that sample is, then the more accurate it becomes. Meaning that the more she charts this month after month, then the more confidence that she can have that, yes, I'm ovulating now, and I'm getting ready to ovulate. So it's basically becoming familiar with the symptoms of her body so that she may be able to tell I'm gearing toward ovulation, all right? And therefore, the earlier that this started, in principle, the earlier that this is started, then the more accurate information she'll have. All right, even coming into the marriage, if she's already been charting herself, beginning with the teen years, for example, she's been charting herself now for several years, she's bringing that knowledge into the marriage, which in my opinion is a great richness, and only she can do that. That's the one thing that she can bring into the marriage. I would say the greatest gift that she could give her husband or her future husband and the relationship itself is to bring this knowledge with her as accurately as possible, because then that will help them make the decisions that they need to make with regards to procreation, with regards to the number of children to have and when to have them and so forth. See? All right, so what I want to do is maybe stop here, because we don't have too many more slides to go. We have about 5 more slides to go. We're going to get now into the bioethical analysis and the relationship between the couple and so on and so forth. So you can already see where this is going. But I figured this could be a good time to break briefly and then come back. We'll probably finish before noon today. But first, I just want to leave clear the physiology of it and the anatomy so that we understand what's going on in the cycle, which is in contrast, by the way, with the man, because when we reach our puberty and we start producing fertile sperm, first of all, our sperm is new every time. We're producing sperm every 24 hours once we reach puberty, okay? Which again, around age 10 or 12, or on average, boys tend to mature a little later than girls, maybe by 1, 2, 3 years later. But it doesn't matter. By the time we're in our teen years, normally already both teenage boys and girls are fertile, right? Adolescent boys and girls have reached their biological maturity. Now, what happens? It's not that we are born with a set number of sperm as baby boys, and then they're arrested, like in the case of women, their eggs. No, we're born without sperm. We're born with the precursor cells that are immature, and those testicles actually need to mature. So they take another dozen years, more or less, after birth. But once they mature, then the primary spermatocytes begin to produce sperm. And from that point forward is on a constant basis. They're just basically replenishing the vas deferens and the seminiferous tubules with sperm, because man, in every ejaculate, there's an average of 100 million sperm, right? So that has to be produced on a regular basis. So when a man physiologically ejaculates, empties out, let's say, the reservoir, then the primary spermatocytes get a signal through the testosterone and the other hormones to produce more sperm. And it's an ongoing process. All right. So the production of sperm is constant from puberty forward until death, until that organ, actually the testicles actually die. So what happens to this excess sperm? Because we don't swell up and burst, right, and blow up. What happens is that after 24 hours, on average, sperm starts dying because it's too old. Keep in mind, it doesn't have much cytoplasm, so there's not much metabolism going on there. And so the sperm dies. And as it dies, the seminiferous tubules reabsorb the remnants, what's left from the digestion of the sperm, all right? And so everything is recycled and new sperm is being produced. And so the tubules, the tank, let's say the reservoir is kept flush and high, you will, on average for any normal man, any normal male. And that's throughout lifetime. So there's less chance of mutations to occur because age is not a factor here, all right? Whereas for the woman it's different because the clock literally starts ticking when she's born on those eggs. All right, so that's again, just to try to cover as much as possible the anatomy and the physiology that is necessary now to do the bioethical analysis on the sexual intimacy of the couple, the married couple, hopefully. Okay. So any questions on the biological aspect of all this?
Father, it's Jose again. I have two questions or,
Yep.
or comments that maybe we could consider on the bioethical component or maybe later on. The first one is on the NFP, and you spoke about kind of the sample size and doing it, since it's a one-person sample size, doing it more frequently and bringing that to the marriage. Obviously, that would be top prior to marriage. But there may be a component of considering masturbation as that act. So how would you contradict that argument that it's not really self-stimulation, it's
Right.
another component? And then the other one is, and that's why I was asking the initial question, there is a urine test that measures luteinizing hormone. And I don't hear too much discussed about that, but there was one point where I believe that was being presented to the bishops as far as an alternative, and I don't know if that there was ever a resolution on that. Those are my two kind of common questions.
Right. Okay. Let me address the second one first. I have heard of it, and it's my fault for not following up on it and see what's the latest on that. But yes, obviously that would be a good, healthy alternative, as especially as the technology advances. Right? If the LH spike can be detected just in a urine sample with some kind of a home kit, obviously that would have great advantages. So my fault is I'm not looking up on that on the latest, but I put it out as a challenge, as an opportunity. If anyone wants to look it up, and maybe you can inform us for next lecture, anyone who wants to look it up and bring us up to date on that. So yeah, that's my bad for not being up to date on that, but I have heard of it. On the other one, again, as mature adults, we need to talk, let's say, clinically about things, right? Like, for example, an OBGYN, just on average, to this day, even as the number of women increases in the medical profession, right? Most OBGYNs today are still men, correct? And for the normal physical exam, he needs to examine her. And on the vast majority of cases, she is not his wife, right? She is someone else's wife. So it's very important when we act professionally, right? When we have a profession to engage in, to be precisely professional and clinical and put aside our personal sentiments and feelings and all that, and just look at whatever we're looking at objectively, right? So we begin with the intention. The intention of the act is obviously not self-stimulation, but the intention is to get the sample, right, for this. And then prudence also to try to stay clear of the clitoris, which we know is a gland that is stimulating. And we know that the perineum is the anatomical area that is at the base of the abdomen, abdominal region. And the perineum for the man and the woman is different, right? Because the perineum on the man basically goes from the anus to the scrotum, which is what holds the testicles, the bag that holds the testicles. So that's the perineum for the man, and there's basically one opening there. But the perineum for the woman actually has 3 openings. It's the anus, the vagina, and the urethra, right? From emptying the bladder. And so that region for the woman is a much more delicate region overall, just thinking health-wise, because you don't want those 3 products to mix with each other, all right? And again, the perineum for each woman is somewhat different. The distances between those 3 exits are different, etc. But it's a very delicate region of hygiene for the woman. And so she needs to concentrate basically on what she's doing, all right? And the fact that it's not a stimulation act, but rather to gather that mucus. So beyond that, you know, the rest for me basically is theory, but each woman has to make that decision in her mind that this is the purpose, the intention of it, okay?
Father Chofi, I also would like to add to that, that at least the most women will know, and it's not necessarily so internal. That's what I was going to say. In terms of masturbation, I don't think that necessarily needs, because it's not going to happen that way. You will feel it. Very outside of your reproductive system. So I don't think you need to, it's just mechanical, but I just wanted to say that way. You can, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, so actually, yes, thank you for the contribution from a woman, because you know, women know what it takes to do all that, all right? So, but to me, the intention is very important at this point, all right? To be clear in one's mind what one is doing. Okay, how about we take a little break? And we'll come back and we'll do the bioethical analysis and go from there, all right? All right, so let me pause for a moment. And we'll be back, let's say it's 10:45, we'll be back by 11, all right? I want to pause recording. Okay, folks, welcome back. I hope you can hear me. And we go forward. So far we've covered all this biology, right? And the whole function is for the woman to be able to detect her time of ovulation. And I was saying that this is, in my mind, a great information, a great gift that she can bring to the marriage, really, knowing this information. Because typically the typical man will have no clue about this, right? And therefore it's also a process of education for the man, for the future husband. In fact, I've been a priest for 37 years and I've counseled and helped many couples in their marriage preparation and all this. And typically, the one aspect that is so important before the marriage is the communication between them. It's that they have a good, honest communication, because it's going to be at the level of the values, the value system. If they don't really have the same value system, sooner or later, in my experience, it's not going to work. But if they do have the same value system, then they have a good chance. All right. And this is part of what they value. Excuse me. Again, the dynamic is different from the man and the woman because he's not getting pregnant. And therefore, there is this pressure, if you will, on the woman to take care of herself, because if she doesn't, then she's the one who ends up pregnant. Now, you can see that speaking in those terms is already putting pregnancy as something to be avoided, as a default. But that's really not the way it's supposed to be. We did not invent sexual intimacy. We did not invent it. We actually kind of inherited this by way of our own nature, just like the rest of nature that surrounds us. But we do have that added value, that plus, that doesn't occur in the rest of nature, which is the human will, the human will. And so now when the will is engaged, it's a different story, because both him and her have a will that they need to exercise. And in fact, it's one of the properties, one of the gifts that the Lord has given us, our intellect and our will, all right? And even when you think of those two great faculties that we have, the intellect and the will, of the two, the one that is truly, fully ours is the will, because the intellect, yes, we have the capacity for reasoning, but unless we are taught something, or even unless we teach ourselves something like reading and understanding things, our intellect doesn't grow. So in a sense, what's in our intellect comes from the outside. It's knowledge that is out there that we internalize, right? That we appropriate and make our own. So in a sense, our intellect, the capacity, yes, it's a great gift, but it's, at the end of the day, it's knowledge that we're bringing from the outside. But what is truly, fully ours is the will, our volition, our human will, which is unique to each one of us. And we either exercise that will for the good or for the bad. And that's precisely, that gets to the core of the bioethics on the ethics side. That's why we are capable of doing ethics, unlike any other animal, precisely because we have a will. We can say yes or no to any circumstance or any situation that is in front of us. And it's about the behavior. We don't judge animals for their behavior because they're just living by instinct. But humans is a different story. And therefore we need to engage. We need to engage in the behavior, what is proper, what is not proper. And then, as I say in my analysis, after looking at this for decades, we have those two alternatives, either utilitarian or principle-based. Either we're going to justify the means or not, right? So being consistent with principle-based, then we can see that this affords a lot of dialogue with the couple even before they marry. And therefore, what is it for the husband? Well, obviously for the husband, the discipline, respect, communication, at the end of the day, is going to be about this sacrificial love. Again, if we begin with the nature, with what is given to us, we did not invent our human nature, right? We're born into it. There's that, let's say, the libido differential, what I call the libido differential. Both husband and wife, they're adults already, so they have reached sexual maturity, and therefore they're producing the hormones like they're supposed to be from their reproductive organs, right? But whereas the woman is cycling, the man is not cycling. He has this constant level of testosterone, normally, that is a constant desire at the level of libido that is there all the time. And any honest man will admit to that. Now, what we do with the libido is a different story, right? So she's cycling, he's not cycling. How to form a lifetime together that is respectful, that is generous, and is thinking of the other to make the relationship work. That's why I say it's this life project together, right? There's that, you can see that NFP promotes a lot of communication between the couple. And also it promotes this discipline, right? Because there's nothing artificial that, think of a dynamic when they're contracepting, he can say, well, I have the desire, and she's either on the pill or we use a condom or we've done the vasectomies and so forth. So why is she denying herself to me? She doesn't have a reason for denying herself because she can't get pregnant anyway. See? And she knows that too. She knows that when they're contracepting, on average, she's not going to get pregnant. And therefore, it's kind of a pressure, but she's still cycling. Meaning that there are times, even with the contraceptive, there are times that she has more desire and there are times that she has less desire. But that is being overwritten, is being run over by the contraceptive. Because it puts the pressure on her to be available for him all the time because she's not getting pregnant anyway. So what's the excuse? Is it that she doesn't like me? She's rejected me without a valid reason. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that with the contraceptive is this disrespectful of her natural cycling. But she has a right, a natural right to be respected of her natural cycling. Which means that on the part of the husband, he needs to sacrifice sometimes and not be having sex all the time. And that's precisely the difference between having sex or making love. In the true aspect, animals have sex to reproduce, but we don't, we should not, rather. We should be making love, literally in the full meaning of that, in the best meaning of that phrase, making love or creating love. And therefore, that sexual act of intimacy of the spouses is recreative and procreative. In other words, it recreates them, it continues to ensure the bonding between them, right? And at the same time, open to that procreation. I want to mention, by the way, how can NFP be open to procreation when it's being used to avoid children? You can see that NFP is just availing oneself of the natural rhythm of the woman, right? So let's say that a couple is using NFP to avoid children. How is that different from contracepting? They're using it to avoid children anyway, right? So isn't it kind of a natural contraception? No, it's not. And again, it has to do with the will. Again, think functionally, right? Think of a couple, one or two couples, one couple is contracepting, the other couple is following NFP. They both have, let's say, legitimate reasons for avoiding children, serious reasons, whatever it is, right? So they have justified the end. The end is avoiding children at this particular time in their marriage. One couple is contracepting, the other one is using NFP. In the contracepting couple, precisely because of the contraception, they're seeking to have absolute control. There's no way they want to get pregnant. And so they're using every means possible, and you can stack it up. She has a tubal ligation, he has a vasectomy, and just in case she's on the pill and he's using a condom. And in addition to that, she also has an IUD. Right? What's happening? They're trying to avoid conception. They're trying to avoid conception by every means possible. So really, internally, in their will, they're seeking to have absolute control over that procreative dimension. right? To avoid it. Again, they justified the end, but the means that they're using is seeking that absolute control. This other couple using NFP. What happens with NFP? They can make a mistake. She can make a mistake and think she's not ovulating, and she's ovulating. It could be that she was just late that one time. She may have a track record of years of charting and everything else, very regular. You know, on day 15, let's say she always ovulates, but so they're having intercourse on day 10, but it happens that that cycle, she ovulated on day 10 instead of day 15 because nature is what it is. You know, and each cycle, it has its own uniqueness to it. And so they got pregnant. In other words, for the couple who is using NFP, there's always the risk that they get pregnant, and they accept that. They accept the risk. So in other words, they're not seeking absolute control over pregnancy. They're seeking reasonable control over pregnancy. But if pregnancy happens, then the couple with NFP is willing to accept that. And it happened. You know, now we deal with it. Okay. So the couple that is using NFP for avoiding children are still open to life. They're still open to it, right? They're seeking reasonable control over it because they can justify not having children at this particular time in their marriage. But there's still that openness. If she does get pregnant, all right, well, then we'll deal with it, all right? So it's not seeking absolute control over a process that is a natural process that is very mysterious, really. I mean, we just barely know, beginning to understand how human conception happens, because there's not only the physical, physiological aspect of the social psychological dimension to it that I've mentioned before. And so NFP promotes a lot of communication between the couple. And this has definite advantages. For example, I was looking up the average divorce rate in the United States right now. Globally, it's about 50%. About 50%. But for couples who are using NFP, all right, even not for religious reasons, they can use it just for health reasons because they don't want to be using chemicals or condoms or IUDs, or they don't want to go through surgery, you know, just for pure health reasons. Many couples use NFP strictly for health reasons without having a more spiritual dimension to it. If we lump them all together, all those couples who are using NFP, average globally, the divorce rate varies between 5 and 15%, depending on who you read and what sources you use, and how it's defined, right? Also because you see that there are couples who are coming in and out of this subgroup. It's a dynamic state at any particular time. And so when you do the survey, the next day that population has shifted already, that subgroup actually. Some people have gone out of NFP, others have come into it. So it's anywhere between 5 and 15%, but it's nowhere near 50%. Nowhere near 50%, right? And so there are some advantages, and it's intuitive. When you think about it, it promotes a lot of communication between the couple. And the respect that is necessary, mostly on the side, well, on the side of the woman, the discipline that is necessary to chart her ovulation with confidence, on the part of the husband, to be respectful of the woman so that they make that decision together of their intimacy. And so there will be times during the month where they abstain from sexual intimacy. They just need to find other things to do. And there are times of the month where they can have their intimacy when they're using it to avoid children. And on average, if we look at the window of 1 week of fertility with the margins of error and all that, on average, 3 weeks of infertility to 1 week of fertility every month, all right? So they can determine their activity according to that. And that is what makes really the union, that it's not just a union of bodies, but also a union of souls, that is respectful of the couple, and they're planned together, and they're planning their family together. And this is basically what Manevite was saying there about the well-grounded reasons. A couple may space their having children throughout their marriage, or even avoid them indefinitely. That is a decision that needs to be reviewed periodically as situations change in life, right? As the marriage goes through the years and the situations change, maybe they become more stable, they can have more children, or maybe the things don't work out as well financially or otherwise. So they now need to avoid children, maybe indefinitely, but it's a decision that needs to be reviewed periodically. Okay. And again, it all comes back to the communication between the couple. One thing to be avoided is precisely this contraceptive mentality. This is very sad. This is very sad, a predicament that we're in contemporary society. But we also assume that what happens in North America and Europe basically is happening in the rest of the world. But I can tell you for sure that many other countries don't have this contraceptive mentality. Children are actually seen as a gift and something to be welcomed, not only in the family, but in society at large. And there's still the concept and the reality of the extended family, where you have 3 generations living at home together. So the grandparents are also living in, and the grandparents get to be with the children. By the way, the other advantage of the grandparents is that they're great babysitters. On average, you can trust the grandparents better than you can trust an external babysitter with the kids, right? Especially when they're little and so forth. And so in many other countries of the world, the extended family is still the norm, though that is also disappearing in general. There seems to be an inverse correlation between well-being and technology, if you will, the increase of technology in society, and the extended family, the number of extended families in that same society. In general, this is a generalization, but it's very real. When we look at the more developed countries of the world, basically Europe and North America, they tend to have fewer and fewer children and more well-being material. I'm talking about well-being material, all right, comfort. Whereas in other parts of the world, meaning Latin America, Africa, Asia, they generally tend to have less well-being that we have, but they tend to have more extended families still intact, and they tend to have more children also. I've mentioned that that is a vitality for the nation as a whole, because there's a tipping point whereby when you start having more deaths than births, what's happening is that the population as a whole is getting older and older. And as that population gets older, they're coming out of the workforce, right? And then that produces its own economic dynamics in the society. There's fewer and fewer young people coming into the workforce with the vitality that they bring. And that is happening in Europe and in North America, to the point that a number of countries already are on this negative population growth, right? They're shrinking, they're contracting, but it's not that they're contracting homogeneously. No, they contract precisely at the upper end, so that people get older and fewer people are coming into the population as young people of their own. At the end, these societies are depending more and more on migrant populations to be the guest workers, if you will. And again, we're seeing that in Europe, we're seeing that in North America. The workers that are coming in, all right, are from other parts of the world. So the contraceptive mentality is a big danger at the level of the couple, the level of the family, and the level of society as a whole.
Father Chofi,
Yes.
one of the arguments that you will hear, I mean, and I understand what you're saying, is that that these children that are coming to the less well-being countries are not properly taken care of. Like there's like the levels of poverty are also high. Let's think about India, Africa, Latin America, Colombia. So they will say it also that this has to do with lack of education. So therefore they don't know, which we're talking about this NFP as an incredible opportunity. But of course, these countries that we're talking about, they don't even have a clue of what this means. I'm saying maybe, and maybe not knowing the reality, maybe that's not true, but I'm thinking of United States, Miami specifically, where I live. Again, as I mentioned before, NFP education is not the norm. I see now that, and I'm talking about in Miami with Pope Francis, yes, probably there's a little bit more pastoral guidance into going to do NFP, because I think it's a requirement now for couples. But my point is, I understand, I totally agree. I think you're right. But also, how can we, because this is very serious bioethical question and problem in the world, having all these countries that don't have well-being, but have a lot of population. That's right. And again, I'm just probably people might exaggerate, and just my point. Thank you.
Sure. Certainly, I would say that this is one of the most complex issues that we have in society today. Anything that has to do with human behavior is going to be complicated. All right. Now, you and I, we've lived in Latin America. A number of us have lived in Latin America for a number of years and such. So we know some of the dynamics there. And it's not necessarily as bad as sometimes we think it is, that the whole population is in poverty. It depends. It's from country to country, and even different countries from region to region. Right? For example, I lived in Mexico City for 6 years when I was a teenager. I saw more poverty in the urban area, in the city, in Mexico City itself, which at that time have had about 10 to 15 million people, more or less, than in the countryside. In the countryside, the standard of living is lower, but you don't see as much poverty as such, or misery. So I see more misery in the urban areas, precisely because many people who come to the cities, they don't have skills to live in the city. But in the countryside, in the rural area, you need fewer skills to live and to survive, just basically work the land. So it's a different lifestyle. So that's one factor. Another factor is the whole issue of corruption, which in my mind, in general, is more intense, is systematic in countries like Latin America, Africa, and Asia. There's a lot of corruption whereby the population is being exploited. Again, going back to Mexico City, my experience as a teenager driving around, the driver's license is a little booklet that opens up like this. And basically what we did was we kept 100 pesos inside a bill of 100 pesos, which at that time was probably about $1, okay, inside the driver license. Because if ever you're stopped by a cop in Mexico City, you may have not done anything wrong. You may have not broken any traffic law, but depending on the car you're driving, they'll stop you. And so what first thing you need to do, you show your driver's license. So you give them the driver's license and he'll look at it and give it back to you. And when he gives it back to you, the 100 peso bill is gone. That's because that cop, at the end of the day, when he goes back into the police station, he has to give a percentage of what he collected. It's called la mordida, the bite. He has to give a percentage of the bite to the chief of police. And the chief of police of that precinct has to give a percentage of the bite to his captain or colonel, whoever it is. And it goes all the way up the line to the highest level possible. It's systematic, the corruption that is there, all right? So that's another issue that is impinging on this poverty thing. But another one that also is very challenging. NFP, as you can see, does not promote free sex all the time. What we have in North America and in Latin America and in many other parts of the world, we have a number of men who are going around the population as if they were bumblebees, fertilizing all these flowers, and they have responsibility for none. And so a very typical scenario also in Latin America is that you have these women who have all these children and they don't have a husband, the children, because their father is already with another woman. So that's definitely not what we're promoting. What we're promoting is to say yes when we need to say yes and to say no when we need to say no. Right? So all this abuse, we cannot default the method for the abuse of the method. Okay. Now, one possible alternative is to just give massive contraceptives to women in Latin America, for example, or other parts of the world, Africa. And some agencies want to do that precisely, as for example, Planned Parenthood. They just want to paper the country with contraceptives and or condoms. So what happens, we fall back into a utilitarian mentality. In other words, now that all these people are contracepting, then in their minds, well, they can have all the sex they want because everybody's contracepting anyway, and they're not going to get pregnant. In other words, it demeans the human person. It reduces the human person to the level of animals, and that's the big challenge, is precisely raising the value system of these people. NFP does that, otherwise it doesn't work. Okay, so NFP requires a maturity from the couple in order for it to work. And it requires a dialogue, that respect and consideration, the generosity. But we have to be careful not to trash the method because of the potential for abuse, because we can make that same argument of abuse on the contraceptives. The consequences are different. On the part of the contraceptive, no children, but the abuse is happening. On the part of NFP, yes, the children, and the abuse still happens. So because we're focusing on the means themselves, we need to justify those means so that they are legitimate according to our human nature. Now, so it is about education, but it's not just education, for example, like the first half of the lecture of the biological education. It's a little further than that. It's formation, actually. It's a conscience formation. The best education that we can engage in is the education of the conscience, of the will, how we're going to react to a situation like this. So at the level of the human will, that's what we need to do the education. So for example, here is another challenge, if you will, after I've presented NFP as an alternative. Obviously, the more charting there is, then the more robust and the more confidence a woman will have as to when she's ovulating, right? So ideally, that would be started in the teenage years. But here's, again, it's a two-edged sword, because if we teach our teenagers, let's say our teenage women, right, to start charting and all that, but they don't really have a mature conscience yet, they could use that if they give in to having intercourse prematurely before the marriage, which again, sadly, is the case in these Northwestern societies. Fewer couples, most couples are not virgins by the time they're married, which means that they have had premature sex, typically during the teen years, the whole experimentation that happens there. So with NFP, let's say a teenage girl is charting herself and is pretty confident about her ovulation, she may give in to having intercourse prematurely, and that's a big risk because she's not taking contraceptives, right? And she may get pregnant because she doesn't have really the maturity to say no. So this is what I find as a challenge. Ideally, we could teach this, let's say, in our Catholic schools, in our Catholic high schools. But the challenge about this is that it can backfire. If the girls, the teenage girls now are thinking that they are safe during their non-ovulation time, and they become sexually active, all right? Obviously, that is a big risk. That is a no-no. So how to promote NFP among the youth, but at the same time, promoting the formation of the conscience to wait, to accumulate this knowledge, but to wait until it's the time to use it properly, which would be within the marriage, because the couple needs to have, especially the woman needs to have that, that reasonable assurance that this man is going to stick with her and their children for life, and actually play out the role as husband and father that he should play in the marriage. I think that when we look at, well, let me stop for a while and see if we get some comments from other people. It's an alternative, it's a challenging alternative. It appeals to higher functions of the human person and the couple, right?
Father, sorry, because nobody's talking. So I would like to say to you that one of the things that I've been doing now, because I teach religion in 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade.
Yes.
And what I'm learning, because as a matter of fact, I consider myself educated to a point. Of course, I don't have the physiological biology that doctors do have and priests.
Right.
But I have a master's in pastoral ministries, and I love the Catholic Church, and I've been Catholic of my life. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of the things that I'm learning are new for me as a woman.
Right.
So anyway, what I've been doing, because I agree with you, like in everything, I don't think abortion is going to end because the law changed. I don't think that's going to happen.
Right.
I really believe that the only way that this beginning to happen is if we start talking more seriously about these issues. Of course, in my case, I cannot talk about intercourse or anything like that, but I did talk about the fusion of the mother cell and the male cell together. At that moment, life begins. And that's something that I think everybody needs to hear more often, because they don't hear that.
Right.
So
right.
I think that in a way contributes to this formation of the conscious, because now they know. I think a lot of people do not know that, because they think really it's going to take, 10 days for that to happen.
Right. So in other words, so knowledge is necessary, but it's not sufficient. I'm talking about, let's say, empirical knowledge of the science, right? And that's why I have suggested to you also to talk to the science teacher in your school and so forth, so that you can more or less coordinate the two curricula, right? The religion and the science curriculum. The idea is that it has to be age appropriate also, age appropriate. And we have we have an understanding in the Catholic Church of what is age appropriate, which may be a different understanding, let's say, from the public school system. Again, working on different sets of principles. But you also bring the fact that you are a wife and a mother and also a daughter who was raised in an intact family and so forth. So you have a lot of richness there and value system that you bring with you consciously or subconsciously. And we're all models for our students. We know that professors at whatever age, we're models for our students, okay? But it has to be age appropriate. So in the middle school there, where their hormones are beginning to fly, okay, that's the challenge precisely, that's the challenge age. 5th, 6th grade. And it has to be presented appropriate for them on the science side, but we cannot leave it just at the science because then that's kind of utilitarian. We have to add the ethical / religious component to it so that we look at the whole person, the full person, when we talk about the holistic view, right? Holistic view of the human person, body, soul, body, mind, and soul. And it's challenging. It's the road less traveled, as they say. It's the higher values. Anything in life is an effort. I was thinking your studies, my studies. I mean, I went through one doctorate in Rome when I was in my 40s in several different languages. And then when I came back and 10 years later, about 10 years later, I went through another doctorate in genetics at Purdue, and it was hard. I was in my 50s at that time. It was difficult, gruesome, really. But anything that has value, is worth sacrificing. So I think that sometimes making parallels with other aspects of life, that is the non-sexual aspect, for example, achieving goals in life as in education and job and so forth, it's worth pursuing, right? It takes an effort. It takes an effort, and we're going to get out of it whatever effort we put into it. And also the guidance, because sometimes we can put a lot of effort into it, and if we didn't have the right guidance, that effort is going to go to waste. I think of my experience at Purdue. I was able to do that doctorate really in 4 years, which is really a minimum for an empirical doctorate. And a lot of it was that I lucked out. I got into a lab that the PI, the principal investigator, Dr. Stein, was an excellent guy. And I had his attention because he normally only had 1 or 2 grad students in his lab, only 2. He did have half a dozen grad students, so he didn't have to divide his attention to all these other people. Most of the time I just had his full attention. And so we were able to get the project. We were very focused on the project, and it was excellent in what we were doing. We were working on DNA, structure and function of DNA. And so that was very fortunate that I was able to lock into that lab in particular and publish. Every year we had a publication, and those just became the chapters of my dissertation. So in 4 years, I was ready to go and defend. Other students may not have that fortune, but a lot of it is a combination of focusing and also some good luck along the way. But the mentoring is very important. The people, you notice that as humans, we mimic others. That's typical for mammals, especially primates. Primates learn a lot by mimicking their parents. And so we, as children, we mimic what we see from adults. It's so important to give our children, to give the young people good examples, good mimicking, right? Because otherwise they can go astray. They can go astray with bad example. It's a constant effort. I don't know if anyone else wants to give an opinion, but the only way that I've known it for coming up to 70 years of age has always been a constant effort, and I'm very happy for it. I'm really elated because I find myself in a position where I can teach others and really feel very fulfilled in my lifetime. But it has been a constant effort, no question about it. What do you think? The youth, what do you think? an effort? I mean, most of you, many of you are trying to get into graduate school, trying to get into medical school. You've heard the expression drinking out of a fire hose, right? That's what's coming to you. That's the first year. I hear that the second and third year, they ease up a little bit. But the first year, definitely, it's going to be one of you, for example, right now, one of you studying for the MCATs, wake up in the morning, crack the books until they go to bed at night, studying for the MCAT, day in and day out. They barely have time to do the summaries for this course. Yeah, it's an effort. You could do something different, okay? You could stop at the bachelor and go do something else. I say that every job, as long as it's decent, legal, and ethical, is a good job if you're satisfied with what you're doing. But you have goals in mind that are laudable, very, very high goals. And not that the medical profession is going to be a bed of roses either, okay? Because once you become a doctor, then the real problems begin. Ask the doctors that we have in class. Ask the medical doctors that you people may know. That's not a bed of roses. But hey, you get to help other people heal, maybe save a life along the way. What do you think, the youth? See, there's an old saying that says silence consents. Silence assents. I assume that you all agree.
Father, this is Jose. If I can make a quick comment about overall on the presentation today and NFP and so on, that I think some of the components of NFP present not just a process, and like you said, it's not just towards an end, but it actually represents a way of life. And I like the components of discipline, respect, communication, sacrificial love, and openness to the presence of God in your life. And that may be what NFP provides, but it should be a way of life for us. And it's actually a component of how we move forward in life. And if we want to achieve a goal, I think those are the tenets that we can follow. So I think learning NFP actually teaches you a very successful path for life. And I will tell you, some of the students are there, and you were talking about the challenges that you faced as you gained your various degrees, and the students are challenged now trying to get to their goals. And it all starts in essence with discipline. Somewhere along the line, you have to learn self-discipline so you can control, like you said, the will of, turning left and going to the bar on Friday, as opposed to turning right and going home and studying. So you have to have that ability, and that's discipline is something you develop. It's not something that's just innate. So I think this is an excellent perspective on how to approach many things.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Martinez. You were able to summarize what I've been trying to say for the past 3 hours, which is a way of life. A way of life. It is. It's an alternative to life. I can relate a few anecdotes, unless someone else wants to say a comment. Again, feel free to comment in, but now I'm just speaking from my own experience with couples over the years and decades. I've known a number of couples who are practicing NFP over years and decades. And one couple, for example, says, "Oh, Father, actually, once you start getting into it, it's a lot of fun because let's say this couple was precisely seeking to avoid children, to have children, all right? And so they're planned the whole month around that. And when she was not ovulating, right? They would plan, like, for example, they would take off a day or 2 or 3 of vacation and even disappear from the rest of the family. They had the grandparents taking care of the kids, and he would take off from work. And if she wasn't working, but they would take off and disappear and go have a honeymoon, you know. And so they gave it priority, and they planned their life according to that. So they really gave priority to their relationship, even above and beyond the kids. They had the kids, of course, and they loved the kids, and they maintained the kids and everything else. But when it was their time, it was their time, and nothing else interfered. Okay, so that's one case. I can tell you another case, for example, a couple who was practicing NFP, they ended up having 7 children. And so you say, you see, it doesn't work. It's the Vatican roulette, what they say, the Vatican roulette. No, this is what happens. It turns out that this other couple that ended up having the 7 children, they just became more relaxed about having children. And they got so much into the communication and the dialogue between them that they didn't even want to plan for avoiding children. They said, well, we trust in God, and whatever children come, they come. And we're going to have our intercourse, and we're going to have our love when we want to have love. And we're not even going to worry anymore about charting or the mucus or anything else. We're just going to be more spontaneous about our relationship. If the children come, the children come. Now, they weren't rich either, right? And I can tell you they got creative. What they would do as they started having 4 and 5 and 6 children, all right, for Christmas, you can see that that could be a problem, the toys for the kids, right? So what they would do in the summertime, just the 2 of them, the 2 parents would go out in the neighborhood, and they would go to garage sales, and they would buy a bicycle for $10, and they would buy, you know, a tricycle for $5 and stuff like that. And they would store it hidden somewhere in the house, or maybe at some friend's house or some other family member. And they would buy their Christmas toys in the summertime in garage sales. And then they would use them at Christmas time. So that was very creative. They would do things like that. There are other advantages to, they realize when they go beyond 3 or 4 children, all right, now the older children are getting old enough to be actual babysitters for the young ones. So by the time the last one was born, the 7th was born, the oldest girl was probably about 17 or 18 years old. So she was definitely the babysitter at home, and then the parents could take off. And the older siblings were watching the younger siblings, right? So the parents actually had more time, the more children they had. Another advantage that came from having these children is after the 4th child, the pastor at the parish told them, okay, from now on, your next children, they're all for free at the school. So you've paid enough already after 4 children into the school. If you have more children, they're all for free. You have free tuition going forward. You know, so they started discovering advantages that they didn't realize before. But it is a way of life. It's a different way of life. It is a different way of life. I admit that. It's kind of countercurrent. That's why I think of the shrimp, right, going against the current. I may have mentioned this before, because at some point, I don't know what I mentioned in what lecture, in what class, what course, but the shrimp, I got it right. You notice has this big abdomen, right? So this is the cephalothorax, head and thorax fused together, and then the abdomen. And the abdominal region typically is what we eat, right? And it's one big, huge muscle. And it's disproportionate when you think about it, disproportionate to the rest of the body. And that's because the shrimp is always swimming against the current. And that's why it's made that muscle so big. But, you know, it's swimming many times against the current because not everyone's going to have our same value system. It's an alternative, but at least it's a healthy alternative. And we're not alone in this whole process either. Here is some protocols, because a number of people have gotten into NFP, even just for health reasons, as I've mentioned, let alone the value of the whole relationship. So, yeah.
In this month, there will be 34 years of marriage.
For you? Yes, for you and your family, yeah? Well, congratulations. 34 years?
Yeah.
You see? And so it can be done. You see? There it is. It refreshes the relationship. You know, there's a lot to be said about it. Just listen to couples who are using it and you'll see. So here are some resources. The Crichton model from Crichton University, it was developed there. It's called NAPRO for natural procreation, NAPRO technology. This one specializes a lot on the 3 primary symptoms, and also these doctors who are NAPRO tech specialists typically also know how to deal with endometriosis, which is a common factor in women's health. Sometimes that can interfere with reproduction or with procreation. And so they have kind of a specialty in dealing with endometriosis, okay? So NAPRO technology from Crichton University. Another one is called couple-to-couple League. Couple-to-couple, they use the 3 primary symptoms mostly, right? All these are, again, online. Symptothermal, again, using the 3 Billings is based strictly on the mucus. It's named after Dr. Billings, who did a lot of research on this. And Family of Americas, that is based on Billings also. This one, Family of the Americas, I like in particular. In fact, this diagram comes from Family of the Americas. Okay, Family of the Americas was founded by the wife of a Guatemalan president way back, Arbezu, Mr. Arbezu, and his wife had a concern because Guatemala has one of the largest poor populations in Latin America, and she had a big concern, you know, for the people that were entrusted to them as president and first lady. And so she did a lot of research and eventually developed a whole protocol that is iconographic. In other words, with little, let me go. They have a website and it's in Spanish and English. It started as Spanish, and then she translated it into English. And they have a booklet that is very iconographic. You can explore it. Just want to see where is well, you can explore the website anyway, but they have a lot of material, right? This, I think, is Amor y Fertilidad, this one. Okay. I'm sorry, not Arbezu, but Arzu. Mercedes Arzu. And it has drawings and photographs and so forth. So it's very intuitive and it can be done without any technology at all. So this is for people in developing countries, for example, that need access without any expense, right? And it's one that is very accessible, Family of the Americas. But these are some resources that you people can explore and hopefully then promote among your family and friends, other people. And this is also for those who are in the Masters in Bioethics here with me. This is one that can be used for the internship. If you have other people that you engage with and talk about this, and you can show them the slides. I give you the PowerPoint and everything. So this can also count toward your internship hours, all right? So you have another incentive there. Okay,
Father Chofi,
yes,
did you remember? I just wanted to know also, how long does it take? The
Right.
question
Oh,
that I
yes.
asked. Thank you.
thank you, right, so the transition, right? The transition. It's going to depend, bottom line, it's going to depend from couple to couple. But a number of couples already are in a contraceptive mode. So how to transition, okay? This is going to require a lot of prudence and respect. So I think a lot of it is going to be here to transition from contraceptive to NFP. Again, we have to be very clear about the end. The couple who's using contraception is because they're avoiding children. So the first thing to ask there is, at this time in our marriage, should we continue to avoid children or not? Because the default in contraceptive, the default is to avoid the children. But that, there's no getting around that question. So that's a very honest, sincere question that has to be done by the couple. Do we still have a valid reason for avoiding children at this time? You know, or how their circumstances change for the better so that we can afford a child or another child. So that's the very first question there. It has to be done honestly. Each one has to ask a question and then talk about it. Then if they both agree that they should still need to avoid children, right? How to make the transition, you can see that there's no easy answer. At some point they have to stop the contraception because that's already impeding their natural cycle, her natural cycle, especially if she's on the pill. She has to stop the pill because that pill is providing the artificial estrogen to regulate the cycle, but she's not ovulating. And so she needs the ovulation. She needs the ovulation to start tracking her symptoms. So she needs to stop the pill. Okay, now, the man needs to cooperate with that and abstain. There's also, it can be seen as something that is called, we call this incremental legislation or working toward a better cause. It could be that transitionally, temporarily, and I'm saying this out of the pastoral situation of dealing with couples who come to me asking, all right? It could be that temporarily, while she gets off the pill and she starts a regular cycle, it may take a month or two for her to clean out her excess estrogen in her body and so forth, you know, that he may use a condom in the meantime, all right? It's not the ideal, but it can be seen as a transition. It can be seen as a transition. The ideal would be for them to abstain for a few months, all right? Until she becomes more confident, but there's no going around it. She has to become confident with regards to her ovulation. So at first, there's going to be that risk that, you know, honey, we may get pregnant, and they need to be willing to accept that. That's where the different lifestyle is a reasonable control, but it's not an absolute control. In other words, it's opening to God's influence in their life. Because ultimately, if we are true believers, then God has to be creator, you know, as God. And he's the one who's ultimately determining life or no life. So, you know, Christina, and for the rest of you, there's no easy way to make that transition, but it will help if there is faith and trust, communication, discipline, you know, self-restraint, and creativity. Creativity meaning that for these next couple of months, we need to find other ways of interacting that is not sexual intimacy. All right.
Thank you,
Bottom line is
Father.
that she needs to start ovulating, you know, on a regular basis with no interference, with no pill, no IUD, so that she can track her symptoms. That's the bottom line.
Would that be responsibility?
So she's only she is ovulating, right? Only she's ovulating. So the part of the husband to just not require, not ask for the intercourse. All right, so not ask for the intercourse. Because again, if she's cycling, she doesn't always want it, but because he's not cycling, the testosterone is there, and in principle, he always wants it. Somewhere I read one time, maybe I should put it on the end of this one, a little saying. One definition of maturity, let me see if I can put in a new slide here for a moment. In a different context, one time I ran into one definition of maturity. A gradual process going from self-centered and other motivated to self-motivated and other centered. See, I can make this in one slide. So basically, it's a gradual process, first of all right? When we think of children, generally, children are self-centered, right? Even little kids, they're grasping everything. And typically the baby, everything that they grasp goes into the mouth. That's known as the oral stage. Everything they grasp goes into the mouth, whether it's edible or not. The baby rabbit, the toy rabbit is gonna get chewed up. And they're other motivated, right? Even as kids grow up, don't do that because you're gonna get punished. Or do this and I'll give you a reward. I'll give you a toy if you do this. So typically children are self-centered and other motivated because their mind is immature. Did I talk about synaptic pruning in this course? Have we talked about synaptic pruning yet? Synaptic pruning? No? Okay, remind me about synaptic pruning. I'll bring it in next lecture. But basically, as we grow, we mature, hopefully, into a mature conscience, and that mature conscience will be self-motivated. You know, I really wanted to obtain those PhDs so that I could teach the subject with competence, right? So motivated myself, but it was centered for others. Because in other words, I was acquiring that knowledge for others, not to just have another feather on my cap and say, well, I got 2 PhDs, 2 doctorates. No, it was precisely to put it at the service of the ministry, at the service of teaching, whatever I was going to do vocationally and professionally going forward. Because the bioethical issues kept getting more and more complicated, and I needed to update my bachelor's in biology from the 1970s. You can imagine that was ancient, right? So I needed, the best way to update it was with a rigorous program like a PhD program. And so it's self-motivated. Going back to that experience at Purdue, when I got there, in the first week, there was a picnic that the faculty of the biology department had organized. So Purdue is one of the state universities in Indiana. It's been called the MIT of the Midwest, and it's part of the Big Ten in football and all that. It's a huge, it's got about 50,000 students, and it's a big tech university. It's a polytech. A lot of engineering is tops in the US, including genetic engineering. Many astronauts have come from there. Shepard, Ben Shepard, and Neil Armstrong. They did their degrees there. Anyway, the biology department is huge. It has about 4 buildings, and they do a picnic every year, or they did anyway back then. In the beginning, 2001 is when I went. And there was a park, a state park nearby that is very pretty. And it was the current students and the new students coming in. This is all for graduate students, only for grads. And the new students coming in to meet the current students in the program, right? And some of the professors there and so forth. It's just an informal thing. And of course, I didn't know anybody because my first time in Indiana, in West Lafayette, Indiana, from Miami. So everybody was new to me, except, of course, Dr. Stein, who was the PI. I had met him before, just in one previous trip, briefly. So I'm sitting on this park bench, the park tables, right? There are benches, and I'm sitting next to another young fellow, tall fellow, young guy. And I said, so what you're studying? He says, oh, he was studying forestry. He was getting a PhD in forestry, all right? And I said, fantastic, PhD in forestry, all right. So how long have you been here? And he said, well, I've been here for about 6 years, PhD in forestry. And he said, I'm about halfway. At that moment, I thought in my mind, never in my life am I going to be here for 12 years, get a PhD, okay? This, when it snows, it piles up. And so I set my mind, that moment, that picnic was very informative for me because I set my mind to get my PhD in the minimal time possible. And I moved into the dorms, bought a bicycle for about $10. And I used my bicycle to go to the lab. The lab was about 3 blocks down the road. And sometimes we're growing bacteria, for example, we're amplifying DNA, right? So you start the culture, you put it into the flask and so forth at 37 degrees. At about 8 hours, you have an amplification because it's a geometric progression. So if you don't prep the bacteria at that point, it goes bad. You know, it overgrows and it starts dying and it contaminates all things. So you got to go when the culture is at its peak. And sometimes it was like a Sunday, 3 a.m. And it was in the middle of winter, in January. I get in my bicycle through the snow and go to the lab and prep the bacteria for an hour or two, whatever it took, and then go back and try to get some more sleep. But that's why the RAs, the research assistants, right, graduate students in labs or postdocs that are trying to publish, they're called grunts, the grunt, because you're a slave of the lab, you're a slave of the project, and the bacteria don't know about weekends and holidays or anything like that. So just stick to it, to the protocol, and keep going, and you tweak the, again, also many times the experiments in the lab don't work. 90% of the time they don't work. So you have to tweak it, change the pH, whatever. And so one is a slave to the lab until the project moves forward into publications that are peer-reviewed, and that's what gets the grants that pays for. But I can tell you, I got that PhD in 4 years and didn't pay a cent. I got it for free because the stipend that I was getting at the lab was paying for my tuition, and I even had enough money for living expense to pay for the dorms and to pay for room and board. So when one focuses, you know, it can be done. It takes a lot of focus, but it can be done. It can be done. Of course, you have to set goals that are realistic also. Some people have done their PhD. I think Watson got his PhD like in 2 years or something like that because he had an extraordinary brain. I didn't have an extraordinary brain, okay? But it can be done.
Send you to your email the video.
Oh, good.
This reference with the
Yeah. Okay. Good. Let's take a look at that for a moment. Yes. So Dr. Farid is, let me see if this is active. I have to do this. Okay, just to get it active, I think. Yes, so the PDR is the physician desk reference, right? Give me a minute, I'm just trying to get it active, get the link active. Well, there's more one, no, wait, this goes up, yeah. And this is a reference for all doctors with medication. At the bottom, mechanism of action. Okay, so this is with regards to the pill, right?
Yes.
So let me see if I can make this a little bigger. Good, it's working. Primary contraceptive effect, progestins, right? So these are the hormones. Suppression of mid-cycle surge of the LH, so it doesn't trigger ovulation. The exact mechanism, however, is unknown. So this is contemporary. In June of 2022, all right? Because there's a lot that we still don't know about human procreation. How are we gonna test on that? We can't really experiment on people as we do with animals or plants, okay? So they fuse freely, etc. We're looking for the percentage, doesn't give us a percentage. All right, so this is just describing the pathway through the hypothalamus.
Yeah, the thing here.
Additional mechanisms may be involved.
So you, preventing
Okay.
follicular maturation, right? That's the
Yes.
maternal ovulation. But after that, it says additional mechanisms may be involved. Other
Right.
actions
Mhm.
include alterations in the endometrium that can impair implantation.
Right,
When you say can impair implantation, it means that ovulation occurs.
right, exactly. Here we go. Here we go.
And it's an increase in cervical mucus viscosity, which inhibits sperm migration into the uterus.
Right,
But
okay,
you see,
so this one is
impaired
contraceptive, but this,
implantation,
right,
you see? So
And-
what it means is that there is sometimes there is ovulation.
right.
You see?
Exactly, that was my whole point. And this is why I'm saying also that what we're seeing sometimes, even in the scientific literature, is ideology filtering into science, which is very dangerous because it's unfair, it's unethical to do that, all right? What I'm saying by ideology is to say that fertilization is not finished until there is implantation. That's a lie. That's unethical. Fertilization finishes with syngamy. That's the biological issue is unquestionable. I mean, that's uniform for animals that reproduce sexually. That syngamy restores diploidy. And so we already, we have a diploid cell. So a diploid cell, by definition, is no longer a gamete. All right, so fertilization is ended. Now, if we want to redefine fertilization to include implantation, that's a whole different thing, but don't call it fertilization. Call it fertilization and implantation. Fertile plantation or whatever, give it another word, but it's not fertilization. Fertilization ends with syngamy, with the union of the two pronuclei into a diploid nucleus. And so here, if we take it at its value, implantation in the human is 5 to 7 days after fertilization, meaning we already have a zygote, we already, not even a zygote, we have a blastocyst. And therefore we have a young human being.
At the end, you see
Yeah.
the 5%.
5%
failure rate.
failure, wow.
Failure rate.
Mhm. So it's even, so forget about the 97 to 99%, you're at 95%, which is really is the minimal standard for in experiments in the scientific literature. The minimal standard, looking for the word, the alpha value, 1 degree is 5%. In other words, 95% assurance that the event will happen, all right, is the minimal standard in the scientific literature. The second degree is 99%, and the third degree is 99.9%, right? But 5% or 95% effectiveness is the minimal standard, and that's where they're at. NFP, when done properly, consistently, and so on and so forth, can give the same assurance, but it leaves, there's always that window. The difficulty with contraception is that people are not considering the window. They think the perception is that they have absolute control. So when you translate 1%, 5% of women taking the pill, getting pregnant, 5% is like 1 in 20, it's not 1 in 100. 1 in 20. Okay, folks, that's all I have. I ended up using the whole 3 hours. Anything else? It's a work in progress, right? And that's why it's a gradual progress. Like the rest of life, this is a gradual progress. So we're always in formation. All right. So if there's nothing else, I thank you once again for your attention. And hopefully next week, we'll look at some maternal fetal medicine and surgery, which is exciting. Good use of technology today. All right. Seeing basically the fetus as a patient, as a medical patient. Okay, thanks again. And we'll catch up next week. All the best.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Thanks, you too. Bye.